Well, hello YouTube viewers. The topic of today's project is psychiatry and targeted individual, or how reptilian regime is using psychiatry as a tool of inflicting pain on targeted individuals. And I'll be going through many different examples, through many different countries: China, Soviet Union, Communist Romania, contemporary Croatia, contemporary Germany, contemporary United States of America, and some other lecturers who's gonna give us a better insight in what is that really. And I'll start with my theory of three major things: what is that reptilian psychiatry doing and how it's playing game with the people. First is using the truth against you, and I'm gonna give you example of Vasily and Marko Franciscovic. Their examples are excellent. Then the argumentum baculum, the argument of the beating stick, is what I call reptilian higher ground, because reptilians are authority. They control and own this planet. Whatever they say is the truth, and that goes also for the psychiatry. And this is how they are argumenting their truths. Basically, whatever they say is the truth. So again, the example of Vasily and his psychiatrist, and Marko Franciscovic and his lady psychiatrist. These are excellent examples. And the third thing is the what I call guilty by association, meaning if person was in the mental institution, for the rest of the society he is a crazy person and not to be trusted. So once when system uses truth to put you inside, and then whatever they say is the truth, and then after that you are immediately labeled, you know, our society is consisted of the applauding hand monkeys who do not see evil, hear evil, and speak about the evil. And then of course you have the Holy Trinity who's deciding what's the truth for those insane and in many cases stupid masses. So first is Vasily. Vasily is I think the classical example of the targeted individual and a dissident from the past. And because it's a past, BBC made a good documentary about it, while in that time BBC and the British establishment was praising the Romanian couple who was ruling the country. They even gave the Ms. Ceausescu doctorate diploma from physics from that exactly time when he was incarcerated. And you know, but this was a different time. There is a time for ass kissing, and then there is a time for criticism, right? So in his case, Vasily tried to organize independent unions and trade organizations. This is like big no, because once you try to organize some political activity which is not in the reptilian agenda, means you're not somebody who's schlepping on the reptilian Illuminati agenda or something, you're trying to create something, you're gonna be targeted. And that's exactly what happened to Vasily. He was targeted by the Securitat, by the Secret Service. He was badly beaten a number of times. Once he made a picture of himself and reported it to the police, which was a mistake, because he was then put into a mental institution. Excuse me for that. And his psychiatrist used that truth of him being targeted, right, as label him a paranoid. Paranoia, by definition, is the fear of something which is not real, meaning that he used reality against him. And then he was so bold, that the psychiatrist was so bold, that he claimed in his face on a camera that they never had sane people in that mental institution, only sick people, but of course also admitting that Securitat was bringing the people. In my intuition, that psychiatrist is the part of the hidden hand or the Holy Trinity. If he's not the reptile, then he is most probably some psychopath or Illuminati member. So that much about the Vasily. We can see it, guy is perfectly sane as anybody else.
Vasily Paraskiv, a working-class man from the town of Ploiești, was one of the very few who challenged Ceausescu openly. Nothing could stop him. In 1971, he sent a list of proposals to the party leadership and to the unions, of which he was a member.
Those 11 proposals stipulated precisely the democratic rights and freedoms that are enjoyed today by the Romanian trade unions.
The response of the Securitate was a series of beatings in secluded places, like this forest near his home.
They beat me. They tortured me. They hit my soles with a rubber stick. They hit my face and my stomach with their fists. And they hit me on the head with bags filled with sand. For 7 days and 7 nights, without water and food.
This didn't stop Paraschiv fighting for union rights. After being attacked again, this time on the staircase outside his flat, he got himself photographed immediately afterwards. But the worst thing that happened to him was being put in psychiatric hospitals 3 times, even though he was perfectly sane.
Ceausescu had declared that only a madman could disagree with the grand achievements of socialism. And if there were people who disagreed, then they were mad. And the straitjacket was awaiting them.
Paraschiv is one of the few victims of the regime who ever got to confront some of his tormentors. After the revolution, he went back to one of the hospitals where he'd been detained. There he met the hospital's former chief psychiatrist, Dr. Ara Kerestighian.
Bună ziua, domnule doctor. Bună ziua. Să trăiți. Hai, mă cunoașteți? Da. Luați loc, vă rog. Ce mai faceți?
Dr. Kerestighian insisted that Paraschiv was mentally ill, but admitted that the hospital had been used by the regime to isolate troublemakers.
Securitatea a dus uneori bolnavi în anumite împrejurări, evenimente, bolnavi care s-au internat la noi.
Mi s-a părut lucru normal asta?
Bolnavi care conturbau liniștea sau ordinea sau deranjau într-un fel sistemul, aduceau, dar care erau bolnavi, nu oameni care nu oameni sănătoși. Oameni sănătoși nu.
Paraschiv's original admission file stated that he suffered from paranoia. The symptoms included publicizing a series of irresponsible complaints against the authorities, at home and abroad. Paraschiv says his dignity was destroyed in the hospitals.
I would rather have been tried in court and sentenced to years in prison than have my dignity destroyed. Of course, that was the intention of the Securitate. They wanted to convince my workmates that I was not sane and that they should ignore ideas about free trade unions and democratic rights.
If anyone was suffering from paranoia, it was Ceausescu. Not just about opposition at home, but also about traveling abroad, as his foreign minister, Stefan Andrei, recalls.
As a rule, he didn't eat at official dinners on foreign trips. He had his meals at the embassy, prepared by his own cook. He was accompanied by a chemist who was in charge, among other things, of destroying his excrement so that nobody could examine it to check the state of his health.
Colonel Dmitry Berlan of the Securitate was Ceausescu's chief bodyguard.
În vizitele respective, dădea mâna cu cineva.
If during a visit he'd shake hands with a foreigner, particularly if he was from the Third World. There was always in his entourage either an officer or somebody from the Food Safety Agency who had a medical kit containing tissues dipped in alcohol. And he'd be given one of them to wipe his hands.
The example of the Soviet psychiatry is excellent example of the reptilian cynicism. They label dissidents as people who have sluggish schizophrenia, and being dissident, they had diagnosed as inflexibility of convictions. So if you're convinced that something is reality, that socialism is not delivering its promise of earthly paradise, people are waiting in lines, for a piece of bread, they get nothing. Families waiting 14 hours in a line to get half pound of butter for somebody's birth cake, right? And if you're criticizing that as a dissident and you don't change your opinion, then you are diagnosed as somebody who's suffering from inflexibility of convictions, which is then sluggish schizophrenia. I also want to add that in many communications I had with the members of the Unholy Trinity, mostly Illuminati members born in, we also, but as a monk or as an employee, I always had this, I would call it the tack to change your conviction when you're of course as me expressing something which is heretical, right? Then they try to change your conviction. If not, then you actually suffer by being smeared and fired, right? Or ganged up against. So this is just another level of that. And what is also very interesting is to see that 2 million people went through that system in Soviet Union from mid-60s till mid-80s. 2 million people, that's 50% of my native country, Croatia, and whole Slovenia. The Mrs. Trump, the Melania, she has the same name as my mother. She's coming from Slovenia. By the way, my great-grandfather was from Slovenia, which is 20 kilometers away from Rijeka. It's already another Slovenian town. So. Yeah, 2 million people. Up to 4 or 5 years per average, medicated with heavy drugs and electroshock, beaten for nothing. That was really serious thing.
Быть верными коммунистическим идеалам, убежденно, с революционной настойчивостью, претворять в жизнь ленинский завет, учиться коммунизму, трудиться самоотверженно, по-коммунистически, всей жизнью своей, утверждать на земле дело Ленина, дело партии. Ленемся!
The Soviet regime demanded absolute loyalty. Those who did not toe the party line were considered dissidents and labeled enemies of the state. With no more than a whisper to the secret police, they would vanish into one of these special psychiatric hospitals. Despite the risks, these so-called dissidents put their ideas of freedom into action.
Я вел жизнь тайную, конспиративную. Никто не знал, что я это делаю. У меня была маленькая подпольная типография, и я стал делать листовки.
While others considered themselves loyal Soviet citizens.
Я, например, считал, и уверенно считал, что я один из лучших советских людей. Когда уже даже меня арестовали и написали особо опасный государственный преступ, я рассмеялся. Я при нем, при этом же самом нынешнем генерале, рассмеялся. А он меня вызывает психиатра на утро.
According to Soviet psychiatrists, they all suffered from inflexibility of convictions, a symptom of a new disorder, sluggish schizophrenia.
Вот когда добьешься, тогда я заверну.
Так, до конца пей.
Перепей, ну вдруг я буду с ним. Ребята, ну заставьте его.
Давай пей.
Like their counterparts in other countries, the Soviet psychiatrists prescribed powerful drugs to cure their patients.
Но они никогда их с удовольствием не принимали. И находят пути их не принимать. Мы обязаны просмотреть прием лекарств, например, чтобы больные лекарства дошли до больного. Вот они где-то уже, как говорится, в горле проглатывают, все, ротовая полость чистая. И потом вот такие делают какие-то движения, отрыгивают.
Врач на обходе говорит, как себя чувствуете, Петр Петрович? Я говорю, послушайте, вот, а там, когда 5 кубиков галоперидола, то надо, например, слюна до полу, там перекошенность вся, значит, одни мышцы растягиваются, другие сокращаются, совершенно ужасные позы, лицо все ужасное, на душе страшно просто. Я человека, вот самое главное, описать это состояние невозможно.
Санитары совершенно безнаказанно могли избивать. По любому поводу. Или вообще без повода. Вот, например, санитар открывает дверь, и вдруг, если тут ты оказался, например, в проеме двери. И вот этого достаточно было, чтобы, скажем, получить удар. Если больной, скажем, оказывал сопротивление при избиении, то его могли привязать и привязывали, и избивали, и продолжали избивать уже привязанного.
Проходит, допустим, год-два, там выписывают убийц, выписывают насильников. Михаил, ты бы лучше убил бы кого-нибудь, мне бы легче было тебя отсюда вытолкнуть. Это было, вот, растало такое чувство безысходности.
From 1967 to 1987, the Soviet government arrested over 2 million people who, for political reasons, were diagnosed as mentally sick and were forced to undergo psychiatric treatment. Even today, psychiatry remains the coercive.
I think the use of psychiatric treatment, so-called treatment, as a political weapon is very effective in controlling the masses. The Soviets were very expert on incarcerating their political dissidents. They would either send them to concentration camps up in the Arctic Circle where they would be worked to death, or in many cases they'd put them into psychiatric wards and punish them. They would punish them with drugs and electric shock and that sort of thing. I think the example that we see in China today is very instructive. China is a good or a bad example depending on how you look at it. I say it's a good example because it shows us how a totalitarian regime can use psychiatry as a political weapon to discipline and torture, literally, and frighten people into submission. What's happening here in the United States seems to be following in the same footsteps of the path that's already been taken in China. There's something called the Mayak Report, a very secret report issued to law enforcement agencies in which they said, beware, anybody that's opposed to the income tax, is talking about defending the Constitution, or supported a third-party political candidate. Individual freedoms are going down while government power and control is going up. And you just lay a mental ruler along that graph in your mind for the last 20 or 30, 40 years and project it into the future, and you can see where it's going. If we were to have a mandatory mental health screening, as they like to call it, not only of all of the young people in school, but all adults and everybody, it would become a terribly effective tool in the hands of totalitarians. Because surely you could find something in everybody's questionnaire if they answer questions honestly. Have you ever had feelings of anxiety? Are you ever unhappy with what the government does? You put that in the context of everything else that's happening in society, the growth of government, the growth of big government, the diminishing of personal freedoms, the desire to regiment the population and eliminate opposition to the political leaders. We put it into that picture, now it takes on a very special meaning. When you look at the area of psychiatry, it becomes particularly worrisome because many people are not sensitized to the political implications of using that field. If we're not willing to challenge, and if we're already afraid that somebody's going to put this label around us, then we've already lost. There's no turning it around. The time has come for us to stand on our convictions, to know what is right, to take the risks, and stand for freedom.
Dr. Colin Ross, who was investigating the CIA psychiatry and their drugs and their methods they used on single out individuals like MK Ultra, but also masses, he said very clearly that we, the psychiatrists, we use psychiatry against people which we don't like either politically or sociologically. So again, the rule of psychiatry is, in my opinion, like it has two major rules. One rule is to take out of the society all those damaged and sick people who are then threat to themselves and their, families and society in general, right? The real sick people. But then also another purpose is to single out and smear the healthy individuals, which are more healthy than average, and they see at least part of the picture of the insanity we are in, like those Soviet dissidents, right, who simply could not mentally be part of that hypnotized, hyper-normalized masses, right? So this is another purpose of the psychiatry, and I think this is very clear to us now.
The first major manufacturers and distributors of LSD in North America were not some sort of beatniks or people from Colombia or some shady criminals. The major manufacturer was Eli Lilly Company, who's the current manufacturer of Prozac. In 1953, they got a contract from the CIA, a $400,000 contract, to provide a secure North American supply of LSD for mind control experiments. LSD was first used by psychiatrists and by CIA officers themselves, personally. Then they started using it in mind control experiments for brainwashing and interrogation. And then from there it spilled out into the general culture. This wasn't just a few rogue mad scientists in a basement somewhere. This was the leading chairman of departments of psychiatry at the major medical schools, grandfathers of 20th century psychiatry, editors of leading academic journals. One of the most amazing things I found out about is brain electrode implants. I found dozens and dozens of articles from UCLA, Tulane, Yale, and Harvard primarily, where a neurosurgeon at Yale, for instance, is writing in the mainstream medical literature about implanting electrodes in cats and in monkeys, and then controlling their behavior with a remote transmitter, and then doing exactly the same in children as young as 11 years old. These experiments were done on contract to the Office of Naval Research, the Department of the Army, and were done at the major medical schools. All these brain electrode experiments, LSD experiments, hypnosis experiments, Manchurian candidate experiments, violated basic medical ethics. It was disguised as medical research. It was purely military mind control, interrogation, brainwashing research. Another element of CIA military mind control experiments by psychiatrists is that it overlaps with chemical weapons, biological weapons, and radiation experiments. And all these horrible experiments, giving x-rays to pregnant women, feeding radioactive cereal to retarded kids, injecting retarded kids with viruses and bacteria. It's the same network of doctors who are doing the mind control. Many of the treatments in psychiatry are also used as methods of brainwashing and torture, not just in so-called third world countries or in dictatorships, but in North America. People we don't like politically and sociologically, we can identify them as mentally ill and we can control their behavior. Military mind control experimentation is not in the past, it's in the present and the future.